What? It seemed appropriate. Well, it had to happen at some point. Somewhere along the line, we had to get back to standard Season 2 Voyager and have an episode that kind of dipped in quality. Or at least that's what I'd like to tell you, but oddly enough, this episode is often considered one of the best ones of the season, which I find very strange personally, but I think I understand why. And I'm going to try and cover that in as I go through this. But first, let's go ahead and talk about how weird this episode is. One of the things I would complain about in earlier episodes is they would have to artificially add some kind of big moment to end a commercial break on, right? Often entire episodes were structured around this, and in many cases it was ludicrous and or stupid, or actually detracted from the episode. There's an episode of Deep Space Nine, which I shall not name, which does this exact same thing, in fact, and for this reason. It was like, we need a big thing to end a commercial on, because that's what you do. So this episode doesn't do that. And as weird as this is going to sound, it works. It really does work. I just wish the setup was a little better, okay? But it is nice to be vindicated that, you don't have to have some, alright, and character development, and then the enemies attack, fade to black. You don't have to do that in order to be an enjoyable episode, so I like that. But one of the things this episode is very weird about is the way it approaches some things, like its teaser. Now, character episode or not, you really want the teaser to get the person's attention, get the viewer's attention, and say, here, you want to watch the rest of this episode. Even for longtime viewers, it's supposed to be like a little bit of a window. Here's a peek, and there you go. That kind of a thing, right? So, and there's the candy store beyond it. So, what we see in this episode is the teaser is Vidians. It's not a trap, even though they've totally trapped us in this exact same way before. Okay, we go there. We find the lady. Okay, she's dying. Alright. Let me just explain what my problem is with this teaser, because it really comes down to the three things that happen here. First of all, the very first thing that happens in this episode is Tom shows up late for work and kind of disheveled, and he makes up a ridiculously stupid excuse for it, okay? He says he was helping someone give birth, which of course nobody believes, because that's the kind of thing you can check on very easily. So let me just talk about this briefly, because I feel like I'm going to be talking more about Tom and his subplot than I am about the actual episode, just so bear with me here. But I feel it's interesting that they approach that in that way, because on the face of it, it's stupid and stupid. First of all, it's stupid because the idea that Tom Paris, someone who is, I'm sorry, a fairly intelligent person, who genuinely is trying to show, to make up an excuse, could do better than that, especially on the fly. And he actually does better than that more than once in other episodes and in this episode. It's also stupid because it doesn't really serve to emphasize, the plot or anything like that. It doesn't serve a purpose, except I know for a fact that this is me reading too much into it, and I know that because of a fact I'm now going to share with you. The director and the producers and most of the writing staff who were working on this episode, well, okay, this episode was like a war zone behind the scenes. Let's just start with that. I'll talk about the other reasons why later. But one of the reasons was the Tom subplot. See, some of the producers, Michael Piller is a good example of this, were really big on the idea of pushing this subplot, the Michael Jonas subplot, that they've been working on since whenever. I don't even remember the episode. It was whatever it was before Alliances, I think. No, it was before Threshold, wasn't it? I know Threshold was in there. Anyways, the Michael Jonas subplot has been kind of in the background, and they've been intentionally doing it. It's like the first story arc they actually planned, and several of the writing staff and several of the creative staff were really on board with this and really wanted to do something with it. But then you have the other staff who didn't give a damn about it, who were trying to focus on their episode, and that subplot was noise. And I like this in its own way. I mean, I don't like it, obviously. But what I mean by that is it emphasizes something I've said a long time, even though I personally view continuity as an absolute must in virtually all forms of entertainment. And if you see anything I do, it will have continuity to some extent or another because that's the way I prefer it, that's the way I think, etc., right? But it is worth noting that that does not make it automatically right. And the reason so many people didn't want to do this Tom subplot or wanted to devote less attention and time and effort to it was because they felt like it was detracting from the show. Not the subplot itself, the fact that there was one, the fact that there was an overarching thing that they kept having to, and I'm going to phrase this in the proper, I'm going to try to phrase this in the right tone here. They have to keep interrupting our show in order to showcase this other storyline that we don't actually care about. And I kind of get that mentality in all honesty. That being said, it's really odd because this is probably the episode that handles the Michael Jonas subplot best, in my opinion, which is really weird because, again, the director of this particular episode just did not give a damn, and specifically went out of his way to cut several of the Tom and Chakotay scenes that were supposed to happen. And the reason why is, of course, the next episode, Investigations, after that, is actually the payoff for that subplot, and so they were trying to do the final ramp-up before the subplot became the A-plot and was what the entire episode was going to be about. So there was a lot of background fighting on that, but I just mentioned this because I know I'm reading too much into this based on the interviews, because there's a lot of interviews about this whole thing. I feel like this is actually deliberately done on Tom Paris's part to emphasize the point he's actually trying to make. Now, granted, we know that something else is going on with this, but the idea here is that Tom is showing up late, showing up disheveled, and giving this ludicrous excuse on purpose, specifically to show his lack of respect, lack of caring, lack of general interest in Chakotay specifically, because he does it specifically to Chakotay, right in full ears range and everything. Doesn't do anything to Janeway. And that makes a lot of sense to me, and actually makes it the whole time I'm sitting, I'm like, yeah, what? But then I started thinking about it, and I was like, okay, that actually would make a lot of sense. It's kind of passive-aggressive, and it's kind of a jerk move, but given what we know, what happens in investigations and what's really going on, yeah, okay, I'm with that, and it actually makes a lot of sense. So, that's the first part of the teaser. Yes, we're still in the teaser. I haven't even left the teaser yet. Don't worry, I don't actually have a lot to say about this episode, as weird as that sounds. I already mentioned the trap thing. Let's talk about the other part of the teaser that really bothered me, because then they get her on board. And if you're not paying attention to the dialogue, it feels like this woman has a common cold. Let me explain what I mean by that a little bit. When you're doing drama, especially medical drama, you need to have a certain sense of flair or urgency about the way you do things. That's just kind of the way it works. I know that's not how it works in real life. I do actually know this. A lot of my family is in the medical industry, and of course I myself have been under the knife more than once. I know that's not how it actually is. But in order to make it look interesting to an audience who isn't innately interested in medical science, you need to add a little bit of flair to it. And that is exactly what they did not do with this scene. And so the whole time there's no tension, there's no suspense, there's no energy, there's no music for that matter. And the whole scene just kind of, again, it was like watching the doctor say, well, this woman has the common cold, but not to worry, Cass, we have a hypospray that can cure the common cold. So I'm going to go get the hypospray that cures the common cold, and then we will cure her common cold. And it was just total lack of anything in the dialogue, and the direction, and the way the scene was shot. I felt so bad for Picardo, because I just felt like he was trying to do something with the scene. But we'll talk about Picardo's performance in this episode in a minute. The other thing I want to comment on, though, is the whole hollow body thing is in all honesty a really great idea, I think, and it's logical that that be the thing that's exploited on Voyager, because while Next Generation really looked into the concepts of what is a life form and artificial life specifically, not only with Data, of course, but with the Borg and with Lore and with several other instances of that, DS9 really looked into what the difference between speciesism and the proper usage of stereotypes, or indeed the improper usage of stereotypes, letting go of old hatreds, cultural differences, that kind of a thing. DS9 was really big on that. Voyager's only issue they really tackled consistently was holograms, holographic life, holographic concepts, what it's like to be a hologram. It was probably the one thing Voyager really did well to contribute to Star Trek as a whole, was their exploration of holograms and holographicism. So I like the fact that this is the episode where they come through with the idea, especially the Doctor himself, because of course he'd think of this. Not only is he frickin' smart and knows exactly what he's doing, but it would occur to him naturally, where it might not occur to a real doctor, that a holographic body would be perfectly acceptable. I'm not saying it wouldn't necessarily occur to him, but it makes perfect sense that it would occur to the Doctor, so I'm totally with that. So, okay, holodeck body, I'm with that. One of the things I almost feel like I wish they had covered, either in lieu of most of the first act, or in addition to what they were doing in the first act, is how it would be different to actually have uh, basically a functionally different sensory input. Now, I don't actually mean the hologram thing, believe it or not, because to me, it would make perfect sense that the hologram, if it was built properly, if it was connected properly, would in fact feel completely normal, because the signals that are being sent and transmitted are basically the same. The thing that I wish that they had covered a little bit more was a woman, because they talk about how different it is, how different other people treat her, and how nice it is to not be in pain all this time. I would have loved for her to actually just do something so simple as to just kind of felt what a wall feels like now that she has skin that isn't falling off, or nerves that are half dead, that kind of thing. Just feel like it's a kind of a missed opportunity. I'll talk more about Act 1 in a bit here. And now we're talking more about Act 1. I really don't have many notes on this episode. The reason I usually consider this a bad episode is Act 1 of this episode. The best way I can explain it, I've made a note here. Let me use my own words here. 20 minutes, okay. I made a note. It was 20 minutes and about 30 seconds into the episode. The episode finally got to the point where it didn't make me want to skip through it. The first 20 minutes of this 43-minute episode are just kind of awkward acting and kind of awkward situations and kind of awkward writing, and the whole thing just rubbed me completely the wrong way. And let me explain a few ways why that is. First of all, the Doctor actually regresses a bit in character. Now, granted, this is only season 2, but we have already examined the Doctor as a person, and I do stress that, as a person, in more than one episode. The Doctor has already had romantic feelings in a previous episode. The Doctor has already gone through many different important character growths, but in this episode it feels like he was reverted way back to when he was first turned on. The way he speaks, the word choice he uses, the total 100% lack of any kind of charm or bedside manner. And I stress that because even though in later seasons when the Doctor is allowed to, Picard was allowed to really show his chops, he can still come off as a bit, abrasive. But he never comes off as flat rude or impolite or just robot-like. In this episode he comes across as completely flat in the entire first act. And then just there's like a switch that's changed, and then he starts acting like the Doctor again for the rest of the episode, which is why I mentioned that. And the other thing I wanted to mention is Picardo is really good at, even when the Doctor is behaving in a somewhat unpleasant manner, he tends to know how to put a degree of charisma to his role, so we still enjoy seeing him play the role. But the whole first act, I'm just staring at this like, I'm sorry if I'm making a big deal about this, but I want to stress this because this is why I called this a bad episode for so many years. I wouldn't finish it half the time. I'd get like partially through the first act and just be like, okay, I don't want to see this, and I'd shut it down and I'd go to the next episode because it was just awkward and boring and dull. Another scene like this. Taurus has a scene. Now I want to give credit to I can never think of how to pronounce her name. The woman who plays B'Elanna Torres. She does a really good example of how she should be playing her character in this thing. She really puts a lot of effort to it, a lot of energy, a lot of passion, a lot of enthusiasm. I'm with that. The Doctor comes across as an idiot in that scene and literally tells her, doesn't actually make it an order, but for all intents and purposes, orders her to strip, put on the surgery gown, and go over there so he can rip out part of her brain. What? And then the woman comes in and really kind of, in an almost unpleasant way, connivingly says, and I say that like because it comes across like she's being conniving, like she's trying to manipulate Taurus, even though I know the intent was to show that Taurus would change her mind because this woman is showing a modicum of politeness and restraint. But that's kind of my point. The reason Taurus said yes was not because the brain ripping out wasn't the thing that really bothered Taurus. Not really. It was the fact that the Doctor was being a dick about it. And so the woman, I don't even remember her name. I wrote down the actress's name here. Susan was her name. good job to her, by the way. Uh, though Susan, who's playing Dinara, I believe actually, Dinara is like actually shows a modicum of restraint and politeness and personality, and then Taurus is like, okay, I'll go ahead with this. It just highlights the problems with that. But I want to go ahead and pause here for a moment because I want to give total props to Susan, the woman who plays Dinara, and Picardo, because they both really do carry this episode. I don't mean that just literally. I mean the only reasons I enjoyed Act 2 and Act 3 in this episode, or Act however you want to divvy it up, after this point and on, was because of their performance. And I really liked that she hit a very, very narrow band between being in between, not actually including, being pathetic and, whimpering and self-pitying and all that, and being too off-putting, being too introverted. She hits this wonderful band in between this, where she does engender sympathy, but she never asks for it. She does actually engender feelings of remorse and pity and that kind of thing, but she never presses the issue. And so she does a really, really good job with it. So I just wanted to give her props for that. It's a pity they couldn't actually, make her a recurring character. I think that would have been awesome, personally. God, I just do not have a lot of things here, do I? Okay, so next thing that really happens, and I want to stress this because this scene was actually the second piece of the puzzle. This happened earlier in a previous episode, and I don't even remember which episode it was. God, I'm sorry, I have a massive headache right now. There was a previous episode where Tom basically had a big argument, well, I shouldn't say big argument, big discussion about how his con officer was terrible and was talking about how he didn't fit in all that well and all that fun stuff in engineering in full view of everyone right next to Taurus, right? So in this episode, he does it again. This time he does it in the mess hall. Now, I mention this because if you're actually thinking about this, Tom making a big scene in places where there's a lot of people and he's guaranteed to be seen in this manner. You see where I'm going with this? It's obvious he was actually thinking about this. It's obvious that in my opinion, if Chakotay had approached him in private, he probably would have still made a scene. But because he approached him in a nice big public area, he went out of his way to make a nice loud scene. You can actually tell the time at which Robert or O'Neill or McNeil. God, I can't remember anyone's name right now. Tom intentionally raises his voice and makes it and what I mean by that is I don't mean just getting louder. Anybody who's done singing or acting or anything knows that there's a difference between talking and projecting. And so Tom starts projecting, and so everyone in 10 Forward or in the mess hall can hear him. And I just like the way they portrayed that whole scene. I have another note about that, but that'll go in my changes section. I also like, again, the Michael Jonas thing. The gentleman who portrays him, again, I can't pronounce. I know his name, I just can't pronounce it, so I'm not even going to try. He's a great actor, though. He's done a lot of great things. He really does, again, a great job of adding subtleties to his role that probably weren't actually there. Granted, he keeps talking about how he insists on seeing Seska. But I keep getting this feeling that based on the way he portrays himself, that what he is doing and why he is doing it is not just out of his nature, his natural loyalty to Seska, is not just out of any dissatisfaction with Voyager's crew, but there's some kind of long-term bond between him and Seska. I don't mean a romantic one. I mean like he owed her, or she saved his life, or he saved hers, or whatever. There was a degree of camaraderie there, and this is why not only is he so insistent on seeing Seska, but why he is willing to take that extra step, as we will see culminate in investigations, when she personally asks him to. And I like that, and I like, if you watch his face, because he gets really pissed off when he's talking to the Kazon, when he's talking to him, he's just, no, I want to talk to Seska, I'm not dealing with this, shuts off the thing, light goes off on his face, really well done, and then he finally gets a hold of Seska. I'm kind of skipping ahead here, but this is later on in the episode. Watch his face. First of all, the relief that he'd finally seeing her, and Seska. Now, Seska's an interesting character, because she is not charismatic, is the way I'm going to put it. She is smart, and in my opinion, she is a good villain. But of the things that is a benefit to her, of a tool in her arsenal, charisma is not one of them. And so she says, in this wonderful way, again, props to the actress, hi Mike, or hello Mike, or something like that. And you can tell from the way, from her word choice, she's trying to elicit that same loyalty that I was just mentioning, that camaraderie, trying to make him feel like she and he are like this. But her tone shows that, if you're paying attention enough, that it is just a mask, that she is just trying to buy his loyalty, and that his usage as a tool to her is what really matters to her. And the fact that her facade just kind of crumbles as he says he's not going to sabotage the thing, and she says, you'll have to suffer with the rest of them if you don't help me. And the it wasn't even anger, it was just a flat statement of the obvious from the way she was saying it. I'm not going to do this, and this is what's going to happen, and you're going to suffer if you don't help me. It really emphasized that point. Watch his face, watch his expression when it cuts to him for that. You can see that he's not only torn about the whole issue, but you can see there's a bit of disappointment there. But, as so often happens, we as human beings, flawed, vulnerable human beings, when we reach a point where we think we've gone too far, we can't turn, the point of no return, we can't turn back. You can almost see Michael Jonas feeling like, okay, I've hit the point of no return, I cannot turn back at this point. And for once, I know that I'm not actually reading too much into this, because again, the actor is both the actor and the actress, do a great job with this, and they were trying to do a lot with very little because they weren't allowed to do much screen time with this. So I just wanted to give props to both that, and really emphasize the subtleties of that. I only have a few more notes here. Like I said, kind of a short episode. I'm sorry, I have a massive headache. Kess. I like the fact that Kess was the one who was used in order to help the Doctor explore his romantic first feelings with Dinara. I like it for two reasons. One, she is incredibly unqualified. Now, you may think that's weird, but it actually makes a lot of sense for someone who is very first engaging in their very first romance second romance, as we've already discussed, to get advice from someone who basically can't, it is totally inexperienced in that matter. It is from a culture that is so violently different. The idea of you mate for life, this is mentioned earlier in Elogium, I believe. You mate once, you have one child, which is a whole another level of stupidity we're not going into. The end, right? So she is totally unqualified to give him any kind of relationship advice, in my frank and professional opinion. But I like that because that just encourages him. It basically, at this point, she's not really giving him advice, she's just pushing him, and he has to figure it out for himself. And the second reason I like the usage of her in this is because it makes perfect sense, because who else would care enough to actually encourage him? Who else would care about the Doctor as a person, and not a doctor, enough to encourage him to pursue this romantic thing? There's one exception to that, because I know one other member of the cast, one member of the crew who would actually do so, and we'll talk about that in mere moments. But I just like that usage of that. I have to comment on this. I made a note of it. I'm sorry, okay. This episode underwent multiple rewrites, and pretty much every time that happens, that's bad. Especially in television. And you can feel the scenes that are written by this team or this person, and the scenes that are written by this team or this person, because there's most of the first act has this just really weird feel, and then there's some good stuff, and then there's some great stuff, and then it like catapults over here in the scene during the surgery. Because I could feel where they were going with him asking her, in the middle of him operating on her body, that he was interested in her. I don't think he would, personally. If I was writing it, I would not have had him do it there, because that's kind of dumb, and he's not dumb. And I know, we're supposed to get this whole he doesn't understand relationships thing, but he does understand emotions because he has them. He does understand behavior because he emulates it. He works on it. He's got access to those databases. This is not something that's alien to him. But I can kind of see where they were going. So, okay, fine. He's going to ask her, I am attracted to you during her surgery. Fine. That I'm okay with. But then they push it. Because what happens after that is Kess is like, I don't think it's the right time, trying to salvage the situation. And the Doctor very rudely tells her to shut up. He doesn't actually say it like that. He says, "Excuse me, Kess," in that very just prissy kind of tone. I believe I was talking to Dinara. And it's just, oh God, I just wanted to smack him. And I felt so bad for Picard having to do that scene. And then, of course, he feels terrible because he's rejected, and he goes to Tom, of all people. I wanted to make a comment here. This is just kind of an aside. I've always thought it was a little weird that he went to Tom of all people for advice on being rejected, because I don't really think of Tom as someone who's a total loser in the romance department. But at the same time, now that a few more years have passed, and a decade or two, I have to admit I kind of get where they were going with this, or at least I kind of get where the doctor was going with, because the idea here is that someone who has been romantically involved with more than one person, who has experienced romantically, even if they were successful, 95% of the time, is still someone who's going to both understand, comprehend, and know how to deal with rejection a lot better than someone who isn't. You kind of see where I'm going with this? So I kind of get that, and I like Tom's line. I actually wrote this down because I like this quote. This is just Tom Paris. This is so much Tom Paris. You never get over a woman you truly care about. And I like the way that's phrased because it's such a common thing in cliched and bad writing to basically say the same kind of thing but omit the last part, which totally changes the meaning. You never get over a woman you were attracted to. You never get over your crushes. You never get over your loves. You never get over your relationships. Well, however you want to phrase it, the idea is that you always carry these burdens with you. No, you don't. But the ones you really cared about, the ones that really honestly meant something to you, those ones stick with you. And again, not only speaking from personal experience, but from many, many people I know. The ones you really care about, the ones you really meant something to you, stick with you, no matter how much time has passed. And I liked that. I liked that tiny little snippet into Tom's mind. I also like the fact that Tom figured out, pretty quickly, all things considered, that Picardo, I'm sorry, that the doctor was the one with the issue. And without even hesitation, he immediately leapt to, okay, let me help you. Maybe I can help. Because again, that's just Tom Paris. There's a reason he's basically my favorite, or one of tied for my favorite characters on the show. He's awesome. I like him. I already commented on that because I skipped ahead a bit earlier. Already commented on that. Okay, 4 things I want to talk about, and then I'm done. And then I'll get to the changes. First of all, the culmination of the Paris subplot here, the Michael Jonas thing, is that Tom Paris actually assaults, basically. It's something pathetic. It's like a shove. Chakotay on the bridge. Now, I actually really like this, as weird as this sounds, because that is really an extreme. Imagine in a military ship in the modern era, almost any nation, but I can only speak from experience with the states because I only know military personnel in the states, in the Navy, in the Army, and that. Imagine if you were on the bridge of a military warship and you actually assaulted your superior officer. That is an extreme, I'm sorry. It's not as extreme as it could be, but it is still an extreme. And I mention that because this is, again, Tom Paris taking what is basically the final step to ensure that everyone on the entire ship knows he has a problem with this ship. There is dissidence, and he's not afraid to shade it, because it accomplishes 2 things. One, he made a scene on the bridge. I already mentioned that, but that's a big deal to me. Imagine how big of it is a deal to these people. Which brings me to point 2. That's going to start the rumor mill going wild, and that's going to spread the news all over. And of course, that ties in finally to point 3. Since he actively did something that would get him arrested, aka put at the brig, he guarantees that there is not a single soul on that ship that is not going to know about this situation, because that's not something you can keep quiet. I liked that, and I like its acceptance. And I feel so bad for Tom Paris, the character, for having to do all these things. But anyways, let's move on. Um, we're gonna go ahead and cover this little thing here, because you'll notice I haven't been talking about the romance story like at all. Ultimately, I don't have a lot to comment on it other than the fact that it is actually surprisingly well executed, well performed. Probably my favorite scene in as far as the romance goes is actually the scene in the holodeck when Dinara comes out in her, naturally Vidian form. By the way, I'd just like to say it's really awesome that the phage isn't communicable through the air or something, because that would really suck, wouldn't it? Some supervirus, right? But seriously though, she comes in, he looks at her, and Picardo does something wonderful, because she looks at him and she just she's so downcast and so horribly, you could just see her shame on her face. And he gets in and he's beaming. He is so happy to see her because it's her. I like that scene, and that ties me into my next point. As I mentioned, there was a huge thing going on behind the scenes with the writing staff as far as this episode goes. I already covered the first half of that with regards to the subplot, but there was also a lot of writing, argument, a lot of disagreement, a lot of rewriting going on for the main plot. The first and foremost is there was at least 6 or 7 times the actual ending of the episode was changed, which doesn't surprise me at all. I also feel like I am, honor bound to mention that a later episode, probably one of my favorite episodes involving both the Doctor and Seven of Nine. Well, I'm just going to read the quote. Well, I don't need to read the quote because I know the quote by heart. Survival is insufficient. Now, any of you who know Voyager know exactly what I'm talking about. And I mention that because that is basically the exact opposite stance that this episode takes. But regardless of that, one of the things that really needs to be discussed is what the message of this episode is. Now, this is a message episode. There is no arguing that. The original intent was not appearance. Some people believe it was appearance. Some of the actors believe that the actual intent was appearance. Although I'll comment that in a second, so bear with me. But the original intent, and I believe personally the correct way to look at this is not you're ugly but it doesn't matter. It is you are ill. You are broken, you are wrong some way, but it doesn't matter. And those are two very strongly different things when you really come down to it, especially because of how tricky, how sensitive that kind of a thing can be. Imagine being someone who, oh, I don't know, I'll just use something myself, someone who can barely walk around because of their bad leg and because of how much pain they're in. Someone who had to be in a wheelchair for months at a time, once upon a time. That kind of thing makes you different. It makes you broken or ill or whatever word you want to use. It doesn't matter. The question then is, does that matter at all? Now, this is also important because I think too many people go to the opposite extreme where it doesn't matter at all. And I disagree with that. On both the appearance subject and the illness subject. Yes, it mattered that I was in a wheelchair. Yes, it matters that she has the phage. Yes, it matters that she's no longer physically attractive as she used to be. But is it the most important thing? No, not at all. And that is the point too many people seem to miss. It is relevant. It's just not the priority. Stop being extremes. It's not that hard. But the original intent, like I said, was to examine someone who is so ill, is so debilitated, is so disabled, whatever you want to call it, that she is used to being shunned by herself, by everything and everyone she knows, and the Doctor doesn't care and loves her and cares about her regardless of her illness. As I said, the other take on that is, of course, that it basically replaced everything I just said with appearance. If you pay attention, every time she brings up, why would anyone love me, or however she phrases it, each time she mentions both, I want to stay beautiful and healthy. I don't want to go back to being ugly and sick. She always mentions both. You can kind of feel the tug of war that the writers were going through in the lines and in the word choice. But regardless, on the appearance side of things, it is worth noting that, again, physical appearances do actually matter. I'm sorry, they do. They are not something that you should focus on, especially to the point of exclusion. And if you love someone, as much as you would like them to look good, that doesn't change how you feel about them. And so again, even if that was the way you want to take this episode, I feel it was a good example of that mentality because, again, the Doctor says, I don't care if you're sick, and I don't care if you're hideous. I care about you. And so no matter which tact you take, it does actually get the message across, actually surprisingly well, all things considered. But the point is, I really wanted to talk about this because so many things since forever, I mean, for God's sakes, this is one of the oldest concepts of story forever, is the idea of, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, or something only being skin deep, This kind of concept has been around for forever. The reason I like the approach of this episode is twofold. One, the portrayer of both actors really did a great job and really got across the feeling of this blossoming relationship and made it feel not saccharine. Basically, is probably the way I want to put that. And two, the thing I mentioned earlier, because I don't think it's really about the appearance thing. I'm sure that does matter to her, and probably not to him, actually, to be completely honest with you, but primarily to her. I do think it was relevant to her that she was beautiful, and now she's not. But The primary focus for both her and then the setting, I believe, was on the fact that she was broken, that she was damaged, that she was ill, she was disabled, and he didn't care because what he cared about was her. Same type of message, but just enough different and just different connotations, different aspects to it that I think they did a good job with it. I'm going to go ahead and that's it. I'm done. So changes. Sorry, I shouldn't sound so enthusiastic. I love doing these videos, but I have just a colossal headache, and wearing this headset kills my head when I've got a headache. So if you've been paying attention, most of the last few episodes I have had like no or little to no changes to them because the episodes have been so good. I would change this episode significantly in two big ways. And let's go ahead and just glance at here. Number one, well, actually, these two ways kind of tie in, but let's just go ahead and say the big thing I would change is I would emphasize the Tom Paris / Michael Jonas plot a little bit more. One of the ways I would do that, which ties into the other thing I was going to say, is bring up more of the first act with the Michael Jonas thing. I know that sounds kind of weird, but the first act was kind of weak to begin with. Granted, a lot of that was writing, but so much of it felt like going through the motions. I know this sounds weird, but we don't need to see every step of the Doctor getting close to Denara and vice versa. We don't need to see how she interacts with, the other members of the crew. We don't need to see how the Doctor interacts with other members of the crew around her. We don't need to see these things. We could infer them because we see steps of the relationship. We do still need to see it progress, but instead of seeing this, imagine seeing this, and then this, and then this, if you follow where I'm going with this. And the progression and the emphasis there would be obvious. And frankly, anybody's watching this probably would get that this was a romance subplot, or I'm sorry, romance primary plot, pretty much from the first time that this happened. From the first time that, okay, holographic body, yeah, okay, we know where this is going. So I felt like it was not necessary to spend time on that, and I would spend that time instead on emphasizing the Tom subplot. Maybe add a little bit more behind the scenes kind of a thing. Add a little bit more of Tom, walking down the corridor, and then he stops and he's just like, and he just kind of does this thing or whatever, and you could see he's troubled about something. And I like that because it would have added a little bit more mystery to the situation, because, as I said before, Tom is acting so out of character that something has to be wrong. But that's the thing. That was what I was thinking. That's what my mother was thinking. That was all the people I knew who were watching this were thinking when it was coming out live, was Tom was, possessed or being blackmailed or had an alien invader or whatever other weird thing of the week was happening. Not that he was, anything else was going on. Having him look troubled, having him look disturbed, just have a scene of him in the corridor just kind of going, just trying to get across the weight that's on him and whatever's troubling him, would have added another layer of mystery and subtlety to that. It would have added another thing to fuel the fires of theorizing, basically, which I would have liked. I also would have probably emphasized the previous animosity between him and Chakotay more, or just, because for those of you who remember, in Caretaker, Tom and Chakotay knew each other from back when Tom was in the Maquis, and that has literally never been acknowledged in any episode past Caretaker ever. Now, granted, ejecting it is fine by me because it didn't add anything, but if it's a part of continuity already, at least acknowledge it. And this would have been a great episode to do that in. To actually have Tom say, Chakotay reach out and say, look, I know we've, been on bad terms in the past and blah, 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 but I really thought this was your big shot. And Tom say, you never gave me a shot, even back then in the Maquis, blah, blah, just kind of something like that. Anyways, I'm starting to feel a little nauseous, so I'm going to go ahead and stop recording. I will see you in the next video.